Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our webinar for this evening when things go wrong, coxing through mistakes. I am Zoe and I have with me the lovely Autumn, who is going to be going
Hi.
through this session with me. Um, it's going to be an interesting one. I think it's going to be slightly different to the bits and pieces we usually do. So I'm hoping that you guys get involved and the stories are interesting. And yeah, give us some feedback whether you're watching this live with us now or you're watching it back on YouTube. Give us some feedback about whether you've liked this kind of content and if this is something we can do again. So let's start with our aims of the session. Like any good teaching aid, I have that ready to go. Oh, we've lost a
Yeah.
couple.
Oh no, there's meant to be animations, but
There's
clearly that
animations. That is
fourth one has
exciting.
been left
Okay,
behind.
so aims of the sessions. Why are mistakes and losses more powerful learning tools than wins? Um, what are the sort of practical strategies for thinking clearly under pressure or when you've made a mistake? Learning how to reflect really constructively on the feedback you're given, gaining confidence in having difficult conversations with coaches and athletes. And then we'll try and touch a little bit as well about how you can respond when things go wrong, sort of mid session, like in the moment. So, a little bit about us at the Winning Cox. I know most of you will have done bits and bobs with us before, but I think the thing that is important to tell you about us is we have all made these mistakes. These are all things that we've done before, and there's a gazillion more mistakes that we won't have time to touch on tonight. But I think the thing that we have done really well is that we have learned from them and we've learned from each other's mistakes as well. You know, there's no point in everyone making the same mistake when we can learn from other people's mistakes. And we really like in our group at the Winning Cox to share those experiences. So literally, you guys can learn from our mistakes, which is why we're here tonight. So, one thing that I would like to kind of turn over to you guys a bit, and maybe you can start popping these bits in the chat, is a word or multiple words for how you feel when things go wrong. So that might be something going wrong in the moment, a steering mistake, the call is wrong, or things going wrong more broadly. So you don't get the boat that you wanted to, you don't get the sort of, your boat doesn't perform how you want it to, that sort of thing. So in the chat, I would love to hear a word. Um, yeah, terrible. That's a good start. Any other words that you might throw in? Orts, have you got anything that you want to throw in for how you feel when things go wrong? Embarrassed? Yeah, that was actually one that I was going to say. Orts, you are on mute, just to be aware. Again,
I
using
said
Zoom for
definitely
the very first time.
embarrassed.
You were going to say embarrassed, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Stressed, immediately stressed.
Immediately stressed, yeah. And that physical feeling that comes with it of like, your heart racing and, that kind of actual physical reaction.
Yes.
Angry sometimes. Angry at the circumstances, angry at yourself, maybe. Um, Panicked. I think that might go in there as well sometimes. So I think the thing to say is these are normal feelings. It's normal to have these kind of reactions, but
Really.
we can train how we respond to them. And this is what we were saying, that the only true mistake is the one from which we learn nothing. And that includes about how we respond to those mistakes. So understanding the way that we respond to those mistakes and how we feel when we make them is really important to the learning that we take forward because you can train the way you respond to those sorts of mistakes. So I think if we think about how we learn from our losses, and this is our story time, um, Orts and I were just going to kind of give you a little story each that we've been through about things that we did wrong and how we learned from them. And I think the thing that we want to highlight is that wins, getting things right, confirm what you already do. They confirm what you already know. But losses show you what you need to change. And that is how you learn, essentially. So I'll go first. I think the big loss that I had in my rowing career, really, well, the most public loss I had was in the 2012 boat race, but it's actually not what I'm going to talk about. What I'm going to talk about is is my coxing throughout those 2 seasons that I was at Oxford doing the boat race. And I think there were quite a few mistakes I made, and a lot of those were things that I didn't really work through and learn until after I'd left. Um, and one of the big ones for me was that, particularly in my first year, I really worried all the time about selection. And all I was really focusing on was, am I going to get selected? How do I get selected? How do I cox in a way that's going to get me selected? And I lost sight of what's most important in coxing, which is making the boat go faster. And I didn't get selected that first year. I was in the men's reserve crew when I thought I really should have had a good shot at being in the blue boat. And when I went back and reflected on that later, I realized that I was focusing so much on sort of what people thought of me that I wasn't actually coxing as well as I could. And that was one of those things that took me quite a while to work out how to do differently in later seasons. And it wasn't something I always then did right in later seasons. There were still periods of time when I, I didn't get that right. But actually, I think then there were periods of time when I was up against selection sort of pressures. In fact, one of those times was up against Morgan, who's one of the other WOX mentors. And actually, I think at that point, I could kind of stop myself when I saw myself getting back into that same pattern I'd been in before. And I could actually kind of go back to my first principles of actually know, what am I doing to make the boat go faster? How am I adding to the crew? And I kind of let myself believe and trust that if I did that, it would pay off and my selection would fall into place essentially. So I think I it took me a while, but eventually I was able to reflect on it. What had happened? Why was I making that? Why was I coxing like that? Why was that the way I was acting? So what happened? Why did it happen? And then what I did next time was different, and I kind of was able to sort of separate my feelings about selection from the way I coxed. So that was kind of quite a big picture one. Autumn, your story is a bit different, isn't it? It's probably a bit
Mm.
more, you know, it's a bit more of a specific point that
Yeah, yours is
you're,
like a long-term like reflection of kind of
yeah,
a whole season or two, whereas mine is very much I say 5 minute, but a very in the moment mistake, which had, I guess, a long-term impact in a few ways. So just to kind of set the scene a little bit, give you the context. So it's Weehawk in, I want to say 2016, maybe 2015 or six, I can't remember. So I was in sixth form at the time. And at that point in time, I was the only girl in my year group who was rowing, and I was coxing. So I was coxing the boys of my age group. But the girls who had been sculling were performing really well. And so the coach said, let's put them out in an eight, and let's put them out with a cox who has some tideway experience. So I was kind of called in to cox. I think it was a J16 girls eight at the time. And I was really excited to kind of work with some girls and do something a little bit different. And I definitely kind of went into that project thinking like, I'm coming in bringing experience. I'm the most senior in the crew, and kind of my role is to bring that experience. And I think I did that in the training and I did that in the race. However, after the race, it's one little mistake can really derail you and where you think you are in your kind of development journey. And this was definitely one of those moments for me. So for those that haven't raced Weehawk before, especially as one of the kind of lower numbers, if you like, when you're in the three digits, etc. You spend a lot of time marshalling, and this is actually after the race this time. So we turned around the bridges and we were making our way back towards the Putney embankment, which is where we'd been boating from, and it was so backed up. And at that time, because it's the lower numbers, the tide is going out and it's getting lower and lower and lower and lower, the water level. And although I had some tideway experience, I didn't know my stuff enough to be aware of how rapidly that can happen. And also, I wasn't thinking forward enough to think about where do I need to be in relation to these other crews to make sure that my boat is in a safe and good place for us to be sat for a while. What ended up happening was we were kind of continuously getting pushed towards the very edge of the bank where it gets incredibly shallow, by the crews around us who were also very quite inexperienced crews. So everyone was kind of flapping and flailing and not really kind of handling the shallow water very well. People were constantly getting their oars and kind of like pushing off. And at one point or another, that was us. We were also doing that. And when we kind of went through that whole period, and there was one point where I remember being sandwiched between two boats, university boats, and we were young kids basically. And I remember feeling really intimidated, and like I knew I was in a bad situation in terms of the depth of the water, and that I really needed to move, but that I couldn't ask the people around me to move because they were older than me, they seemed more experienced, and frankly I just didn't get great vibes off of them. I was just uncomfortable and felt afraid of them. um so that situation we were in there led to us getting grounded, between these two boats. So the one to the left of us also got grounded, and we also got grounded. So they must have been in a terrible state considering they were closer to the bank than we were. And I kind of, you know, in the moment, you're like, oh, that's not great. That didn't sound great, but we weren't taking on water. It didn't seem like a problem. And we got the boat off the water. And honestly, the length of the boat was completely scratched up. There was some dents, some damage. Nothing like we didn't write the boat off, but a lot of damage had been done, across the length of the boat. So it was going to obviously have to go in for repair, etc. I remember us taking it up to heads and we're walking it back to the trailer, and my coach spotting it and kind of pointing it out and looking at me and kind of going, you know, what happened here? And I remember that sinking feeling in my gut going, I knew it was bad, but when you look at it, it's so much worse because you really see the damage that has been done. And it really sat with me for a long time, kind of a feeling of guilt that I had, done something that was going to cost money to the club. I felt embarrassed that the crew that I'd kind of come into as supposedly the most experienced person, I was the one that should have taken control of that situation and um, done what I knew needed to be done, which is tell the crews around me they needed to give me space so that I could get into deeper water. So I needed to kind of be a little bit braver in that scenario. And I kind of spent a long time beating myself up about it, which at the age I was makes complete sense, and I forgive myself for that. However, I do think that the reflection I had eventually from it made me such a better Cox, because it really made me hot on being really clear about, knowing the water before I get on it, making sure I know what to expect, what the dangers are, where I need to marshal in terms of, you know, is it going to be shallow? Are there bridges that are dangerous? Things like that. Um, Also making sure that I was really clear at communicating with crews around me in scenarios like marshalling, but also in training, and making sure that if I'm thinking ahead and I go, I need space to be there, telling the crew next to me, by the way, I'm aiming for over there. So stay over there and give me space, and being really clear at what when I'm thinking ahead, communicating that with people around me, and also owning my mistake, because for a while I really felt like I had to defend myself, and I kept saying the crew next to me wouldn't move, I couldn't do anything, and I got very defensive. And whilst that was true, that being my one takeaway and my excuse every time it got brought up either by the coach or the crew, not that they really brought it up a lot, they were very sound about it, actually, they were very lovely, but anytime it was mentioned I felt the need to defend myself. But actually I didn't need to overkill on that front. I just needed to go, yeah, that happened and I learnt from it and I would never do it again. And I wish I'd owned it a bit more, and that changed the way I deal with situations like that going forward, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that brings us on really nicely actually on to our next slide, which
Mm,
is about how you like how you reflect on things like that,
yeah,
and how it is that we should go about reflecting on it. So,
absolutely.
if we think about how do we learn? How do we learn from these losses?
Hmm.
So we always say that reflection should be curious, not critical. So it's not about, well, I did something wrong. Oh my gosh, I did something wrong, and a spiral.
Mm,
It's about curiosity. What
hmm.
happened?
Yeah.
So, like we were talking about, it might be that you've had a mistake in your steering. How did it happen? What
Mm,
actually led to that? Can I break that down? Because just knowing what happened doesn't necessarily give you the tools to fix it or to change it.
yeah.
Why did it happen is really important.
Yeah.
And what will I try next time? So, what
Hmm.
now? And that has to be something that's actionable. There's
Hmm.
no point just saying, oh, well, I won't do that again.
Yeah.
And this is why you have to go into the how, right? Because you need to know, well, it wasn't just the thing that happened, it was the things that led to it. And some of these are going to be, you know, slips or lapses or things that went wrong just because you weren't, fully concentrating or you were distracted. Some are going to be things that went wrong because you've made a decision that wasn't quite the right one in the time. So you need to actually break down all, everything that led you to that mistake to really work out where the point is that you can change it and fix it to do it differently. And I think the thing that
Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say the thing
Oh, yeah.
you said that really stuck with me was about sort of owning it. And I
Mm,
just think about it from a coach's point of view.
yes.
When you're coaching someone and you know that they've done something wrong, they've made a mistake, it's not the making of the mistake that is a problem for a
No,
coach. It's the
no.
lack of ownership and the lack of honesty. And I'd much rather hear a Cox that I am learning with say, right, I made this mistake. I think it was because I just didn't see that crew coming up behind me. Maybe I'm not looking round enough. Is that something we can work on? Because that's
Hmm.
then something really actionable that you can think about.
Yeah.
It might be a situational thing. I didn't see that crew ahead of me. Maybe I need like a seat pad underneath so that I've got a little bit more vision. Yeah,
Hmm.
actually, that's something we can really work on.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I think I think it's much better. And I think your crew, if something's gone wrong, your crew and your coach are going to trust you much more in the future
Yeah,
if you are honest and you own that mistake. If you say,
absolutely.
oh, well, it's because of what the other crew were doing. Oh, it wasn't my fault. Then
Yeah,
they're much less likely to trust you. But I think that is
100%.
often, that's the instinct, right?
And I think just off the back of that exact reaction from the crew, like you can't be expected to know and expect every single thing about everything. And that doesn't just apply for coxing. You're never going to know everything. And there will be times where you're challenged in a way and you go, I didn't know how to handle that. That was brand new to me. The most important thing is that you come off and you own that and you say, I actually didn't, I've never come across that before. I hadn't prepared for it. I wasn't ready for it. And I'm not happy with how I dealt with it. So let's break that down and decide how we want that to be dealt with in the future and make that a crew decision or make that a you and your coach decision. Make it collaborative rather than going completely insular and defensive. It's much more productive long term. Although it's kind of embarrassing in the moment to own up to a mistake, long term, it's way better.
Absolutely. So I think let's go on a little bit to why things go wrong.
Yeah, let's do it.
What is it that leads us to these issues? And I think it's important to kind of be cognizant of this in the back of your mind because it's all too easy. And especially for people who, maybe have a coach who hasn't done any coxing or hasn't really thoughtfully sat there and considered what a cox is doing, it's often difficult to see all these things that can lead to a mistake. And this is where that breakdown can be really, really helpful. So these are just a few things. And, one is just generally there's a very, very high cognitive load when you're coxing. You've got, the basics of I have to steer this crew. You've got the I'm running this session or I'm running this race plan. You've got the I'm keeping an eye on everything that's around. I'm in charge of the safety. You're thinking about the weather. You're thinking about what the boat over there is doing. You're wondering, oh gosh, is that something under the water that I need to steer around? There's a huge amount
And
of
you're trying to cox and you're trying to coach in that moment and say this is what I'm
exactly,
feeling and
exactly.
so much going
Um,
on.
so much going on, and synthesizing all that information is something that is very difficult and you learn to do some of it becomes more automatic. It's a bit like driving a car. When you first start driving a car you have to really really focus on every single thing you're doing. By the
Mm,
time you've been driving a car for 10, 20 years it's much more automatic, but then there are going to be times of higher stress where you have to focus again. And
yeah,
that's exactly the same in coxing. So I
yeah.
think, if you're starting out, if you're relatively new to coxing, really try and break it down. And there'd still be times when I was, in Olympic year, like running up to the Rio Olympics, where I would sometimes say to my crew, right, guys, I'm really focusing on my steering. I'm not going to say anything for the next 2 minutes. Or I'm really focusing, I really want to nail getting the exact boat feel for when this is right or wrong. So I'm not going to say anything for the next minute. Because even for me at that level, I knew sometimes there were times when the cognitive load was too high and I had to bring it down.
Hmm.
Another classic, limited feedback, and this is something we go into a lot and we talk about all the time in at the Winning Cox and with all our webinars. Really, is about how we're getting feedback on things when they go wrong. And I think this is why it's sometimes so important that you lead on this.
Mm.
So sometimes you need to go out and you need to search for that feedback. And I think that is something that's even more uncomfortable to do when you're searching out feedback on something that you know wasn't right,
Yeah.
whether that was a specific decision, or whether it's more broad, about how you're doing something as a Cox. But that is how you're going to learn. Um, so I think that's quite important, and we'll go in a little bit later to talk about having difficult conversations, and that I would say would just kind of feed into that. Time pressure, time constraints. That might be an in the moment thing. You're having to make snap decisions, or it might be just a more general thing. I don't know. I don't know about you, Alts, but I often felt from a coxing point of view that I often felt like my needs as a cox, my learning needs, were not as important as the rowers around me.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to kind of put yourself onto the coach. You don't want to put that pressure. And I suspect, if you're in a club where perhaps you've got volunteer coaches, for example, I would probably feel that even more deeply, but
Mm.
it is important. Your role is as
Absolutely.
important. So you
Yeah.
need to make that time.
I've absolutely felt that, but I mean, that's a massive part of what we do is trying to completely squash that whole concept because it's so counterproductive in the long term. The more you can be kind of an ally with your coach and you can get regular feedback, the more you're going to be enacting what they're hoping for in the boat. So I think, yeah, definitely try and push for that.
And, just that general responsibility. Coxing is a huge responsibility. Your responsibility for the safety of others. You've got
Mhm.
responsibility for very, very expensive equipment. Um, and that can really weigh heavily on your mind. And then to add to that, you've got the pressure of competition, whether that's internal, external. That's going to potentially ramp up um, the stress and the sort of the cognitive load again when
Definitely.
which can lead to mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think what I've put this into is a sort of my coxing pressure loop that I think this can really like feed into, and it's working out how to break this cycle that is so important and is going to lead us to getting the most out of our mistakes because we can go back and work out where it went wrong, but also making sure we make good decisions moving forward. So this is my coxing pressure loop. So the situation occurs, you have an emotional response to it. And we talked about some of those emotions earlier, the embarrassment, the panic, feeling terrible, that kind of thing. Those emotions then affect your decision making and how you react. So that might be a decision in the moment. You've made a sort of poor steering decision in a race, and then you know that feeling. You clam up for the rest of the race. You can't get your words out properly. You're sort of not trusting yourself, or it might be a broader thing, a bit like more like what I was talking about. You
Mm.
haven't had a selection go your way, so you therefore, you're coxing worse, and that's a whole sort of catch 22.
Mhm.
Those emotions may also affect the crew response. If they hear that you're stressed and tense, that might affect how they respond. And then you end up with a suboptimal outcome and it all feeds back in again. So, what we need to work out is how we break this cycle. What can we do differently to stop this loop from occurring? So, to break the cycle, notice what is actually happening at the time. Instead of just thinking, this isn't going well, we need to think exactly what it is that's happening. Not just it's not going well, what exactly is happening. So the boat speed is dropping. You've got your little stroke coach in front of you. You can see the speed is dropping. Why is the boat speed dropping? So we move on to diagnose. You've noticed it, we diagnose it. Is this a technical problem or is it a problem with power? So is it that their timing's off, so the boat speed's dropped, or is it that the pressure is off? for example. I mean, I'm simplifying this hugely, obviously. Um, okay, I've made my decision. I've diagnosed it. It's a technical problem. The timing's off. And then the third thing is you act, and you have to act with clarity. Once you've made that decision, you stick with it. So the timing's off. I can feel that actually I diagnosed it because there's a lot of check. People are moving in and out of the front at different times. That's killing the boat speed. I know exactly what call I can make that's going to fix that. So instead of thinking just this isn't going well, you've got to think what is the first step to fixing this? And I
Mhm.
think that is massive just when you're overwhelmed generally. Instead of getting overwhelmed, just think what is the first step? I actually do this at work. I did this at work literally today. I was sitting at work, I'm a doctor, and I was in an assessment unit. It was very busy and I was getting overwhelmed. Loads of people were asking me questions. I was the only doctor in the assessment unit. More patients are coming in, everyone's stressed, buzzers are going off, babies are crying, literally, babies are crying. That's not even hyperbole. And I just had to stop, sit quietly for a second and think, right, what is my first step? And that's always the way forward. You can get overwhelmed or you can start fixing it.
Mhm.
So that's the way we break the cycle.
Love that.
So, difficult conversations. I think this is one of the hardest parts. And again, I think this is something that you can take into every walk of life. You can take this into your work, you can take this into your relationships, all sorts of things. We navigate our setbacks best when we're doing it with other people. So that might be your coaches, your athletes, but starting those conversations can be really, really hard. And you've always got to return to a framework of curiosity and learning and honesty. We're trying to avoid judgment. We're aiming for development rather than just laying blame. So, what I try to do is try and move away from again just a why am I not learning? Why am I making these mistakes? Because that's where you get frustrated. Oh, I keep doing that. I keep doing that. You get frustrated. And it's again breaking it down. It's a bit like we were talking with the sort of notice, diagnose, act kind of thing. So break it down. So rather than just why am I not learning, make it more specific. What should progress look like from me over the next few weeks or the next few races or the next few times I go through this corner that I keep seeming not to be able to steer? What should progress look like specifically? And what should I prioritize focusing on right now? You can't do everything at once. You can't change everything at once. And sometimes a single mistake might have several different things that led up into it, which all need addressing. So,
Mhm.
what should I prioritize on first? What's the most important thing for me to prioritize? And then, what feedback will help me improve the fastest? Who do I need that feedback from? When do I need that feedback? How do I need that feedback? And that's when you can ask, for something specific from your crew and your coach, that exact feedback that you need. I think those difficult conversations are potentially the most difficult when you're talking about selection.
Mhm.
And I think we can all agree that selection as a Cox feels very personal. And it's really, really difficult to get away from that because as an athlete, it's much easier just to say, you look at the erg scores, you look at the seat racing results, you look at your, what's on the telemetry, whatever it is, and you can kind of take that out of your personality a bit. Whereas with coxing, a lot of it feels very, very personal.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing that I would say is really separate yourself, your identity as a human being, as someone who has worth. Separate that from your selection.
Mhm.
Your worth as a Cox, as a person, does not equal your selection. When you go and start having those difficult decisions, it's really, really easy to start them on a defensive foot.
Mm.
But the best way to go in is just to talk about how you move forward. Like we were saying before, what should I prioritize right now? What feedback do I need? And you can say, can we talk about exactly what I should focus on for the next selection? That might be the next race, the next season, and how should I assess my progress in this area? And this is the thing that we always bang on to with the coaches. If you're if you're selecting on a certain trait, steering, technical knowledge, um, boat feel, motivation, you need to have a way that you're going to assess that, and you need to have a way that you can coach that and help someone learn in that area. Okay? So what exactly should I be focusing on first? What should I prioritize? And how are we going to assess my progress? I would also probably add in, how are we going to, how can I ensure that I get feedback that leads specifically into that priority, that focus? Again, focus on the controllables. I know it's so easy to say, and we all know this, and it's such a cliched phrase, but ultimately, if sometimes selection comes down to, this the other cox was better at these things, or the other cox is in the boat, they've already proven themselves, and essentially, unless they make a mistake, that's what we're sticking with. And you can't control that. You can't control what they do next. All you can focus on is your own things, your own priorities, your own improvements, the bits that you can focus on. And honestly, you just have to be brave with these conversations. I think honesty, vulnerability can go a really long way. And if you
Yeah.
go to a coach and like Autumn, like you were saying, if you go to a coach and rather than saying, oh, well, I couldn't do this because, this other crew was there, if you go to them saying, I know that I got this wrong, how do I fix it for next time?
Yeah,
People are going to want to help you. They're going to want to be on your side. They're going to want to work with you.
absolutely agree. I think also just kind of speaking to the point as well about selection is that sometimes coxing is a bit subjective. It is difficult to categorically always say one cox is better than another. Sometimes you are the right cox for the crew. Sometimes you are not the right choice for that crew, someone else is. It doesn't necessarily mean you're better or worse than the person who was right. It means that your style either does really suit them and what they need or doesn't. And that, again, it's not a personality contest in that way. It is just a case of what is going to get the most out of those rowers. And it might not be you in that moment, but that doesn't mean there's no crew that will find you are the perfect person to make them go as fast as they possibly can. So I think just it being really clear about that feedback on why you weren't selected. It might sound like a personality trait, like, we wanted someone that was more power and aggression focused rather than someone who's more technical focused. You might listen to that and not understand why that would be the case, but ultimately you've got 8 rowers in that boat who maybe have that preference, and they're the ones who are in the boat that have to respond to it. So I think understanding what your strengths are and knowing that when you're trialing for a crew, understanding, do my strengths align with their needs or not? That might be the difference, not just that you're not good enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So I think, I mean, we're kind of at the end to sum up.
Oh, rapidly that.
What we've talked about. I think the most important thing is expect mistakes and actually welcome mistakes. They're
Mm.
part of performance, and they are part of learning, and they are how you improve ultimately. Um, Try and reset yourself quickly. To some extent, we talk about it with our crew, don't we? We talk about, oh, someone's had a bit of a duff stroke. You sort of say, oh, someone's caught a crab. That's a good example. If someone catches a crab in the race, you don't then spend the rest of the race reminding them that they caught a crab. You say, right, never mind, forget about it, move on, and let's go again. Right? That's exactly what we need to do. And so you reset and you use that breaking the loop, notice, diagnose, act. So you can break that loop and you can set yourself on the right path. Afterwards, it's about honest reflection, having those difficult conversations when they need to be had. And ultimately, the goal isn't to avoid mistakes, but we need to learn from them faster than everyone else does, and that's what's going to keep you moving forward.
Love that. I
So
think
I
the
think,
approach works in so many ways, like the big ones and the little ones. It could be you fumble a word in a session. Why did that happen? Was I over processing? Did I have too much stuff going on? Did I get on the water already rattled from my day and not thinking clearly? To the massive things like you have a crash or you have something happen that it feels really monumental in your career, but you can still always come back from it. Um, yeah, if you follow these kind of steps, I think that's really useful.
yeah, totally agree. So what I'm going to do is actually going to I think I'm going to probably stop the recording and then
Mhm.
we can just ask some questions. So then if people feel like they can just shout stuff out if they want to. Uh, just to sum up before I do stop, I hope you all have really enjoyed that today. If you have, please do give us some feedback. If you haven't, even better. If you've really not enjoyed this at all, please give us the feedback because that's how we're going to learn going
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
But yeah, it's been a really interesting subject for us and has been good to talk about. So
Yeah,
thank
we
you
get asked
for
about it
coming.
a lot, and I feel like people will have some specific questions, so by all means, throw them our way.